We're living in really difficult, disorientating times. If you switch on the radio, open a paper, glance at social media, it's a wall of people shouting at each other. And now as Scotland heads towards an election, it can feel like we're gearing up for the next instalment of the Hunger Games. You know, as people vanish into political camps, social media descends into a cesspit and we lose sight of something really essential. That behind every opinion, every argument, every ballot paper, there are human beings with lives, families, fears, histories and hopes. And that's why today matters. Because an event like this with two remarkable people, and they are remarkable, reminds us of something really vital, something restorative justice has understood for decades. That connection is still possible. Dialogue is not weakness. That listening does more than shouting ever will. And even when disagreement is sharp, we can still find shared ground, shared values, and shared humanity. And today is about remembering that, reclaiming it, relearning how to speak, listen, disagree, repair, and move forwards. So firstly, our guests who are going to come up. So first, Lynn Burns. So I don't like reading everything out, but I think you just need a wee bit of context. So Lynn's a victims expert in the Scottish Sentencing Council. Her life was changed forever in 2013 when her son Sam was murdered. And since then, she's done something truly extraordinary. She's channeled unimaginable loss into determined public service. She's worked tirelessly to ensure that the experience, needs and voices of victims are not merely heard, but respected. And she's done so much. The Victims Task Force has been deeply involved in the cross-party group on adult survivors of child sexual abuse. And she does all of this with compassion, honesty and a quiet strength that demands respect. And if I may add something personal, she's one of the most thoughtful, compassionate and quietly determined human beings I've ever had the privilege to work alongside. She embodies integrity. She brings grace into the most difficult spaces, and she shows us what true service looks like in Scotland. And we are really fortunate to have her. I genuinely make her a dame, and I feel that I should have that ability to just create damehoods. And our second guest is Jacob Dunn. So Jacob's the co-founder of the Common Ground Justice Project, a national initiative dedicated to rebuilding trust in the justice system by listening to the public, engaging victims and communities and bringing lived experience in the heart of reform. Jacob's story is his to tell, but his beginning is tragically familiar. A single catastrophic punch on a night out in Nottingham, a moment of violence that killed James Hodgkinson and tore a family apart. But prison wasn't what changed him. What changed him was restorative justice. James's parents, Joan Scourfield and David Hodgkinson, met with Jacob. They asked him the hardest questions imaginable and they held him to account. And that process opened the door of a reckoning that reshaped all their lives. We are all more than the worst thing that we've ever done. His life since then proves that. He's become an author, an educator, a campaigner, committed to changing how we talk about harm, accountability and repair. His BBC Radio 4 series, The Punch, won the ARIA Award for Best Factual Series, and his memoir, Right from Wrong, became the critically acclaimed play, Punch, which has been on the West End and on Broadway. So welcome everybody. Thanks for choosing to be part of the antidote to what's going on in the world today. Choosing connection, choosing listening, and choosing repair. Let's begin.
Anyone can be affected by crime at any point in their life. When people experience it, they can be left feeling anxious, disappointed, and with questions unanswered, even after the case has been through court. The opportunity for a person to state the impact a crime has had on them is not always provided fully within the criminal justice system. Often, it cannot meet the individual needs of those involved or address the personal impact of the harm. These very personal experiences might include physical and mental illness, emotional distress, trauma, physical injuries, financial impacts, and practical impacts, such as loss of employment. It's not just the people directly involved who are affected, but also their friends, families, and the wider community. So what can we do about this? One way in which we can address the harm caused and not simply respond to the crime committed is by using restorative justice. This gives people who have been affected by any harmful behaviour the opportunity to communicate with the person responsible in a safe and structured process supported by an independent trained facilitator. It aims to ensure the voices of those harmed are heard and focuses on what they need to heal and move on. Restorative justice can be accessed by anyone regardless of age, gender, ethnicity, or the type of harm that's occurred. It can take place at various and appropriate points of the justice system, or even after this process has ended. However, it will only take place after a robust assessment of risk and need is completed, and careful planning and preparation has taken place. This is why restorative justice is seen as a process. Restorative justice is voluntary and ensures that the needs of the person harmed are at the centre. It will only go ahead if and when everyone involved feels able to. So what does it look like? Restorative justice can take place in many ways, and depending on factors identified in the assessment and planning stages, these might include direct communication, a video link, written contact, or third-party contact. So why would somebody choose to take part? Many people believe it's about forgiveness and saying sorry. Although this may happen, people who have used restorative justice say it's more about having questions answered, gaining closure, and moving on in an attempt to heal the harm caused and take back control of their lives. The outcome of restorative justice should be whatever the person who has been harmed needs from the process to heal and recover from the impact of the harmful behaviour.
I wanted him to be accountable to me, not to a judge, not to the police, not to prison officers, but to me. Taking part in restorative justice was the key that unlocked the door to my future.
Restorative justice is helping you to realise if you couldn't forgive yourself, they can listen to why it happened and help to move on.
After the attack, my son was clearly shaken and upset. I, on the other hand, was left with anger and no direction in which to channel it. Taking part in the restorative justice meeting was a chance to open up a conversation in which both my son's attacker and I could listen and equally be heard. When I left that meeting, it felt like a weight had been lifted.
The Scottish Government has made a commitment to have restorative justice available across Scotland, providing services that are of a high standard, delivered by someone with specialist training, and to raise awareness and understanding of the process. For more information and regular updates on Scotland's progress with restorative justice, please see the dedicated webpage on the Scottish Government website.
I don't like to blame, because blaming is never restorative. But what I would like to say is, Karen, you motivated me so much just then. It made me want to run up on stage at the wrong time. But what it does remind me of, it gives me an opportunity to actually name and model being restorative. And so, and how it acted and how it worked for me in the past. So, as you heard, we're all more than the worst thing we've ever done, and we're all more than the best thing we've ever done. And that's true for me. I'm more than a killer, as some newspapers would like to describe me, and I'm more than a campaigner and who's had a play written about them and this poster boy for rehabilitation. But coming up here at the wrong time, the other thing that it makes me want to acknowledge is timing. You know, timing is everything. Timing is important in the process of restorative justice. Timing is important in when's the right time to have these difficult conversations. And also, what I also wanted to say was, I felt embarrassed when I got up at the wrong time. I thought, oh my God, as if I've just got up and this thing started and now I'm embarrassed. But that is what I would say is we have to have a space. We have to create a safe space for people to be able to acknowledge feeling embarrassed, to acknowledge feeling shameful. And sometimes in prisons or in the punitive measures that we have, it doesn't create much space for people to be able to acknowledge the harm that they've caused and to go even think about the harm they've caused to other people or themselves or their own families. And so thank you for creating a safe space for me to acknowledge my feeling embarrassed for getting up at the wrong time. But it's a pleasure to be here. As you heard, the play is about to do a national tour, and I'm fighting peacefully to get it to a Scottish theatre. I was brought up in Nottingham, and I used to hide out in Sherwood Forest with my merry men and, steal from the rich. But we didn't necessarily give to the poor. But I was poor, I guess. Things seemed fine when you're in those kind of circumstances, with addiction in the mix. My mum was alcoholic, and you don't really kind of see what's wrong with life. But my mum was very protective of me, and I think sometimes we can be very protective of victims, and we can be very protective of people in custody that we're supporting in our roles. But that wasn't helpful for me, with my mum being overprotective. She didn't want me to mix with the kids on the street, so she'd try and keep me in, and then I'd be rebel and run away. And so what ended up happening was our relationship got more and more tense, and we needed to do restorative justice. We needed more restorative conversations, but she didn't have the skills to acknowledge her pain and her trauma and her ways of dealing with stress. And I certainly didn't have the skills as a young kid with ADHD and autism, which is why I'm probably, jump up at the wrong time and always need a routine, which is like the polar ends. Having ADHD and autism at the same time it's difficult, because on the one hand you want routine, you want structure, and on the other hand you hate routine and you hate structure and you want to do something new every day. But I didn't understand, and I didn't have the emotional literacy or the language to express any of that stuff. And that's why when eventually I went and took part in restorative justice, I was like, the practitioners are the ones with the skills. That's the skills I need. Because I came out of prison for manslaughter, homeless, no qualifications, nothing, basically, nothing to put on a CV, no experience of doing anything meaningful, no purpose, and a lot of excuses and internal narratives and scripts that I used to use to keep me safe, which was fuck everyone else, right? And just have that belonging in my group and my gang. And so when I came out of prison and all of a sudden I was confronted with this option of taking part in restorative justice, and we'll get into this more in a little bit, but what I realized at the end of that process was I need the skills that the practitioners have got. Why have they got these skills in order that can help people resolve conflict? Because actually, they can resolve the conflict that I have right now with my victim's parents, but I'm definitely going to get into a lot more conflict in my life. It doesn't matter how restorative we are, how emotionally aware we are, how much therapy we've done, we're all going to say the wrong thing at the wrong time. We're all going to get triggered. We're all going to slip and do bad things and say the wrong things. So that's actually a life skill. So I've gone a step further in my campaigning since going through restorative justice and saying that restorative practices are an essential. They're basically, in my view, they're a human right. And everybody should have the skills. Everybody, when they leave school, should have the skills to express themselves, to resolve conflict, and to have healthy relationships. So without me wrangling on too much longer, I would like to introduce you to some clips from my play. There's a few clips there, which gives, what we've tried to do with this play is to make sure that as a viewer, as an audience member, you can put yourself in everybody's shoes. Because I think that is where empathy is built, where common ground is found. And so you saw my mother, and my mother and James's mother have a relationship, but they never meet, ironically. They never meet, but they see each other throughout the play, and they talk about each other. And it's about humanizing those stories, because everybody's a victim when in crime. there's a case to be said that everybody is a victim of the circumstances and the harm that's caused. And so this is a play that kind of like really gives every character, all perspectives are given enough space and time for the audience to really connect with what crime really does and why we do need to find a way forward out of the binary, to try and resolve conflict and find new ways forward, and listening to everybody's needs and whose needs aren't getting met. And usually where people's needs aren't getting met, we're all good at doing needs assessments on everyone, but how do we actually really listen and get people's needs met? We're bringing everybody on the journey with us and bringing them, doing justice with people, not to them, not for them. And so you have my mother's character from one side, and she actually did do that. She said, I've got the real pictures of you. You're not, that mugshot isn't you. But then she'd be shamed and, your son's a killer. And, my little brother would go to school and the teachers would be saying, keep your hands to yourself, and, and the stigma that she got from that. And she was a registered childminder. She was very proud of looking after young people and children in my neighborhood. And I can remember they used to come in as I became an adolescent. They used to come into the house and they'd be like spitting and putting their fingers up at us and stuff. And then like by the time like she's finished with them or they've gone to somewhere else and they don't need a childminder anymore, they're like, please and thank yous. And she got Ofsted registered outstanding just before I went to prison. But then Ofsted came in and said, you've had a convicted violent person living in your house. You can no longer be a childminder anymore. That was the only profession she knew. And then the kind of catastrophic impact that had to her, falling behind on the rent, addiction, spiraling out of control, sadly taking her life. What she did is she prepared me, she put the empathy in me to be the person that I am today. We're sometimes quick to blame parents, but they needed support as well, and perpetrators' families also need support. And the play highlights that side of things. And my mum was that person who always used to say, Jacob, what about that other person's mum? That's what she always used to say. And I was like, I can't deal with that mum. I can't even think about the other person's mum. But eventually, I was able to think about the other person's mum and have friends with that other person's mum. We were together earlier this week doing... Has anybody seen that social media channel, A Mug of Life, with that guy who walks around going, excuse me, would you like a cup of tea? Yeah, well, if it is, we're going to be on that soon. So we were on a park bench talking with a cup of coffee earlier this week, and she's part of the Common Ground Justice Project because she believes that we all need to come together to find a new way forward on justice that takes the party out of the politics and gets to what we all want, which is, I'm not from Scotland, but I definitely want Scotland to be the safest country in the world and to kind of shine a light on kind of where we can get to. And I think you're ahead of the curve in many ways from England, but on restorative, I think there's, where England are a little bit further ahead. So I'd like you to take the baton, please, and run with it. And maybe that's enough for me, and we can get into a proper conversation in a second.
Good afternoon, everyone, and my name's Lynn Burns. I live in Ardrossan in Ayrshire, and in October 2013, my son Sam, who was 22 years old at the time, was stabbed and murdered in Saltcoats. There were 3 young men involved in his death, and they were aged 17, 18 and 22, and they were all known to us, and they weren't bad boys. And a really bad thing, but they weren't bad boys. The subsequent process of justice was really horrific. My observation was it didn't really seem to serve anyone. I thought it might be about finding out the truth. I thought, I don't really know what I thought. I just knew Sam wasn't coming home, and in that respect, it wouldn't really have mattered what had happened. But I would think it was almost more traumatising at times going through the justice system than the actual event itself. So, turns out I'm one of these who likes to get their nose into everything, and I thought, you know what, there's only 5 million of us here in Scotland. I'm pretty sure we could do better than that. I thought, yeah, so I just decided to get involved in things, and that's kind of what's brought me here today. As Karen said, I've been involved with the Scottish Government's Victims Task Force with Scottish Sentencing Council, do a bit of work with Fearless Project, dealing with young people and anti-knife crime. Also, I'm an MCR Pathways mentor in my local school, and I absolutely love dealing with the young team. They're absolutely brilliant. And I genuinely think that we can do things better. I think that we're already doing things better, and I think that when we all collaborate together, Scotland will be the safest country, and that can only be a good thing. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks so much, Lynn, and thanks, Jacob, for introducing yourself and giving us a wee bit of information about your story and what brought you here. And just to start off, it's my fault that Jacob came to the stage early, so I would like to be accountable for that. The embarrassment is mine, not yours, so I'm so sorry, Jacob, that was my fault. What we're going to do is we're going to have a discussion, probably about 50 minutes with Jacob and Lynn, and there'll be an opportunity for some questions afterwards, so keep your hands down for now. But to get us started, if we could start with you, Jacob, because you have experience of being part of a restorative justice process. So could you tell us a wee bit about that and the impact and what your thoughts were before, after?
As I said, I had no idea of what restorative justice was. I came out of custody kind of just waiting to cause more drama and just chaos. But unbeknown to me, David and Joan, the parents of James, who I punched, were inquiring about restorative justice. But they didn't know restorative justice existed, so they were speaking to their victim liaison officer, and they were going, we want to know what he's doing in prison. Is he doing some behaviour management, related, alcohol-related violence course, or is he doing anything to address his needs or his offending behaviour? And they kept saying, we can't tell you that. Victims, what good have you got asking about what he's doing? They didn't quite know how to deal with a victim wanting to know what the perpetrator was doing in custody. And David was having nightmares, and Joan, as you saw in that clip, nothing else is working. I used to be a right laugh, my son wouldn't recognise me, is what Joan tells me. I don't want to speak on her behalf, but that's what she tells me. And so they were like, well, what's the other way? What's the alternative way? And then the victim liaison officer said, there is this thing called restorative justice, but I'm not sure it would be very valuable to you, or whether Jacob will even agree. And then that's what started the process then. So when I came out of prison, a couple of months after, went to see my probation officer, or as you call it, social worker, which I think is a much better model. They were like, oh, it's restorative justice, and the practitioners came to come and see me and explain, because it's really important how you explain restorative justice to people that haven't heard of it for the first time, and they explained it in a way to me that kind of made me think, why not, that it could actually be beneficial for me, even though the main reason this was going forward is because David and Joan had questions that were keeping them up at night, that weren't the justice process. I pleaded guilty early on the advice of my solicitor, which meant there was no trial, which all the information didn't come out in the administrative process of justice, and they were left with more questions than answers. And the only way to get those answers was to take part in restorative justice. So they asked me those questions, and I answered them. They were able to kind of get a better understanding of who I was, what my circumstances were coming out of prison, and then their needs started to shift in terms of, well, justice, what does justice look like? What are the outcomes of justice that we want as victims, and how are our needs and our voices being heard in that process? And they wanted to kind of me to not just know the harm that was caused and to answer their questions, but to try and make some steps to not hurt anybody else, to take accountability. And that's when I then went on a journey of going back into education and keeping them updated through letters. So we started off as mediation. So restorative justice can take many forms depending on the risk and everybody's needs. It started off as shuttle mediation, then it went to letters, and then eventually we had a face-to-face meeting. And that whole process took 2.5 years. But when I say 2.5 years, that doesn't mean it was super resource heavy. It wasn't like the practitioners had to do masses amount. They had to do the prep, they had to meet the victim, understand their needs and what their most crucial questions were, meet me, and then they did that like 2-3 times, going back and forth with questions and answers, and then it went to letters and me at the end of every year sending them an update on how I was getting on and my progress. And then once I got into university, they said, we'd actually like to meet you face to face. But initially they said, we might meet him in 10 years if all goes well. But then as that then became 2.5 years after we developed a connection. And the strange thing is I felt like I knew them. Like they changed my life completely, but I'd never met them. So when I was walking into that meeting room to meet them for the first time, I was soon to be a dad, about to study criminology. I know it won't be like that for every person who takes part in restorative justice. It won't have that level of impact that it's had for us, but even if it just achieved the aims of getting those victims' needs met and answering those questions, I think that would have been a good outcome.
And listening to your experience was very different, as you were never offered, or you never had the opportunity to make a choice, but you are very supportive of that being a choice.
Absolutely. I think for me, I thought the justice process, I thought that a trial that lasted almost a month at the High Court in Glasgow would answer questions. Turns out that's not what happens. So we were left with a lot of questions afterwards, and I didn't even know that was a thing that I could ask. And, I thought that's none of my business, the justice system. I think initially what I needed someone in authority, i.e. a judge, to say, you shouldn't have done that, son. That was kind of enough for me, because I always felt that it didn't matter what the sentence was, and it just didn't matter because Sam wasn't coming home. So it was just, I was almost like, can I give you this burden? Can you just deal with this for me, please? Because it's just too much. There are questions that I would like, but there was a lot of drugs and alcohol and legal highs involved that night. So I don't even know whether the questions would be able to be answered. What I did know from day one was that the young man who's still in prison for murder, as I say, he was 17 at the time, was known to us, went to the same Sunday school, baptised in the same church, lives round the corner from us, and wasn't a bad boy. So I knew he'd done this, and I really did want to say to him, what were you thinking? Yeah. And that's not you, by the way. But the truth, the sad truth is, he wasn't thinking, because if he'd been thinking, he wouldn't have done it. As time has gone on, I look at it and I think, there's not really a downside in this. I don't think, because it's prepared properly, that the people who are actually managing the process are really skilled. And I think it gives both parties the opportunity to express the harm. So I wish it had been an option, and probably if it was an option in the future, it would be something that I would look to take part in.
There's lots of words that sort of occur around discussions of restorative justice. Accountability comes up sort of repeatedly, and forgiveness comes up as well, which is, of course, you referred to, I think, in our conversation as the F word.
Yeah, the F word, yeah.
What was your experience of that, the personal transformation for you? Did you see it as a personal transformation going through that process?
I think it was the motivation, because everybody needs a reason to change. Everybody needs a purpose to live, a tribe to belong to, and what I needed was something compelling to make me drop my whole lifestyle, the friends I had, the way I saw myself, the way I viewed the world, all of that. And I needed something tangible to make me want to put all that down, because that's a scary thing to do. To say, I didn't get rid of all my friends, but to just say I'm no longer going to put myself in risky situations. I'm no longer going to sell drugs. I'm no longer going to, I'm going to manage and put boundaries in place with my friends to say, look, I'm okay doing this with you, but if you're going to do this around me, then please don't do it. You know what I mean? And having all those difficult conversations. to go back into education as someone who was neurodivergent and who was always in isolation and excluded, and to approach education with a level of motivation and optimism where you think you might actually be able to pass. Do you know what I mean? And actually you aren't the dumb kid, which everyone, which I believed. And I think people need that. And I think restorative justice gave me that motivation, because the people who I'd harmed the most seemed to be the ones that were judging me the least. And they wanted me to better myself. And that kind of gave me permission to go, you know what, maybe I don't need to keep myself in a box and be scared of the world and put myself outside my comfort zone and explore and be curious, not furious. And then I went into education, and then with the right support around me, then, because I think what restorative justice does, it can enable those kind of like shifts in thinking, or those light bulb moments, teachable moments, some people call it, and then okay, let's get the support around this person and make sure he's got some mentors and the right people around him. And I had an amazing person at college, and then when I got an A star in English in my GCSE, and I was like, wow, that was the moment then where I was like, wow, what else? What other limiting beliefs do I have that aren't true? And then it just became a process of breaking ceilings and exploring not a new version of me, because that person is still there, still part of me. We're all good and bad, but trying to accept that, incorporate that, and then learn to be a future version of me that I could be proud of, is the best way of putting it.
And you've talked about the F word as well.
Indeed.
And you've said for you that was a very early...
Yeah, it was that day. That day, I remember. So Sam died on our wedding anniversary, and he'd been texting me because he was at his friend's house, and I'd said, look, we're going to the waterside tomorrow for lunch. He had a wee baby girl who was 19 months old at that time, and so I'd said to him, right, Bubba's coming for lunch, and if you're coming, come in and get clean underpants on, please. And we're going at 1:30. So he'd messaged me back, and then 45 minutes or thereabouts later, I get the phone call to say he's dead. It just texts me, so that's clearly a mistake. So the following day, I did this thing of imagining that the police weren't doing anything about it. Quite the reverse. So they all these detectives and a senior investigating officer arrived in the house about 11 o'clock the next morning, and they were just going through what they were doing and what action they were taking. And I remember really, really, really clearly, I remember thinking, I need to forgive these boys right now. Because although the police were saying, well, we can't tell you who it is, I live in this is called the Three Towns, Saltcoats, Ardrossan, Stevenson. Everybody kent who did it the night that it happened. So I remember thinking, if I don't hand this over now, I may as well just walk along to their houses and just give them my house keys, my car keys, my bank card. I remember having that thought, you'd be better just to pass everything on to them. So in that moment, I thought, right, that's it, done. I forgive. I would caveat that though, and this is why these conversations are so important, because I was always really acutely aware that I couldn't have conditional forgiveness. Like, I'll forgive you if you go on, son, and do something of worth with your life, because really that part of it seems to me is none of my business. And until you said that, I didn't even know that was a question I could ask. I'm still not sure that it is a question I could ask, but how... It's nothing's going to heal here, because we just adjust to living without Sam. His daughter will be 14 next month. She had one birthday with her dad, so we just adjust to that. But if there was a way that something could change, that something could be different, that would feel that all was not for naught. If that makes sense. But I do come back to the thing of, and I'm acutely aware that I can't have conditional forgiveness, so I do try to kind of rein myself in. But how amazing would it be if we could actually reach people, as you say, Jacob, in that reachable moment, when somebody could have that wee moment of clarity and say, right, that's not me, that's me over there. So thank you for sharing that.
No. And I think it's and I didn't answer the part of the question actually where you asked about forgiveness. I went on a tangent about teachable moments, and what I was trying to do is put into context that restorative justice, it is limited. You shouldn't, I don't want to be, coming up here and saying it changes every person who goes through the process to like go on and achieve amazing things. But what's actually important is it can just get really important needs met for people, like holding someone accountable, like getting a few questions answered. Like these are like just as important as opposed to reductions in reoffending or victim satisfaction rates, or saving the taxpayer money, which it does all free. But in terms of forgiveness, I'm on a journey of forgiving myself, and that's a up and down journey at times. But David and Joan, in terms of conditional and what you're talking about in terms of being conditional, I actually told them I was going to go to uni for them. I was like, I'm going to go to uni, get a degree for you guys. And they're like, no, you can't do that. What are you talking about? You've got to do it for yourself, because I was doing it out of shame. I was doing out of trying to repair the harm, but I'll never be able to repair the harm. So it became a kind of like, what's the mouse wheel, right? I'm just like, trying to do as much as I can. And I'm still do that at times. But Joan forgave me, and David doesn't forgive me. And I actually don't feel like I need forgiveness, either in terms of it being conditional. I respect. If Joan turns around and tomorrow says, I don't forgive you anymore, that's fine. Do you know what I mean? And if David forgives me tomorrow, that's fine. So I don't think it's nice, but I don't think it should be, conditional, as you say. But yeah, forgiveness is once you start scratching the surface, it becomes a very kind of, it's for, it's for yourself essentially, I guess. And restorative justice shouldn't be really conditional or outcome driven. It should be based on everybody's needs and how we get them met, and anything else is a bonus.
And I think that was part of my misunderstanding of restorative justice as well, that somehow it's about forgetting, certainly people that I speak to, other families who've experienced crime and violent crime, it's to make the perpetrator feel better or whatever. But it seems to me that when I take a step back, it's actually to make all of us better. It's to make us as a society heal. And I'm very much obviously so. My late husband didn't forgive the boys. I think everything is for you. That's my coping strategy.
Yeah.
I used to be a right laugh as well, by the way. I really was. So it's my coping strategy. It's so, I don't know whether it's dissociation or whatever it is, but that's how I choose to deal with it. But looking at it logically and looking at it as someone who's now got an interest in what's going on in our community, I think, yeah, this is potentially serving all of us. It's not a panacea for everything. It's certainly not going to be suitable for everyone. No. There are some people who have experienced harm and they're so angry and they will almost certainly never recover from that. And perhaps if I was in their shoes, I would feel exactly the same way as them. But I think for if we can get this right, a good whack at the time, then that is going to serve all of us. And it's, again, I go back to the just understanding what it means, what's available, what can we do, and the outcomes will sort themselves out.
Yes, yeah.
That's not really what the funders want to hear, mind you. But
and we've mentioned sort of accountability before, and that being a part of the restorative justice process. What do you think it is? And of course, as I'm sure everybody in this room knows, it's not instead of the justice process. It's an additional. But what do you think? What accountability does restorative justice offer that the sentence doesn't? You served a sentence. The boys who took Sam's life served a sentence. What do you think it is that restorative justice does that gives accountability in a way that maybe doesn't completely feel like it?
I think they're two entirely different things, and I think they need to be. We can't, you know, sentences have to be a standalone and an independent aspect of the justice system, because there could then be the perception, rightly or wrongly, that their sentence was somehow modified because they agreed to do this. Can't be transactional or conditional, but the two things I think are equally important. And in the restorative area, it's not all hugely violent crimes. You know, I think restorative as a format probably suits, you know, antisocial behaviour, that kind of thing. Just what we're doing is, it seems to me, we're just being the community that you know, that I remember from my granny's days. We don't do that because she knows Mrs. McMillan and she knows your granny, and it's more about a community, and it's about saying no, that's not happening. And bigger part of engendering a sense of hope into people, a wee bit of hope, a wee bit of expectation, feeling safe in their community. And I think that lends itself really well to that. But in terms of sentence, my own opinion is that they need to be completely separate, and always so.
Yeah, and in terms of like once those what do you think, from being on the sentencing council and the stuff you do with victims, in terms of like, I agree, it can't be conditional, it needs to be impartial in terms of sentencing in the courts. What do you think there's an assumption? I can't generalise anything because everyone's views are unique and every restorative process is unique. But where do you think the public are at and victims are at generally in terms of what they want as an outcome? Do you think from those sentences, is there an assumption that, you know, prison sentences, you know, create harm, that punish people and they act as a deterrence, or is it that they encourage people to be accountable? Is it that they're going to get rehabilitated once they're in prison? Do you know what I mean? Do you think we've had that conversation about kind of what we want from sentences and from kind of...
So I can't speak for the Sentencing Council here.
No.
I'm here as me. But my own personal opinion is that so what my experience is that the public say they want X, Y, Z. Or, you know, you just need to go onto social media and it's like, oh, rope. And appalling. But when you actually dig deep there, it's what it essentially boils down to is I want to feel safe. And there is, you know, there has to be a punishment part when you know, serious harm's been caused. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all, you know, we need to keep the public safe because that's us. There is only us. There's only us.
Yeah.
So I think it's about information and education. I know that although I'm not speaking for Sentencing Council, they have videos which go out to schools, to modern studies, pupils and things, and they'll say, so you be the judge, so they'll give you a scenario and say, well, what would you do? And quite often the research has shown that the people who are like, oh, lock them up and throw away the key, will actually come down in some instances with a lesser sentence. But I think it's probably more complex than just incarcerating people.
Yeah.
We need to be looking at rehabilitation. We need to be looking at community-based sentences and actually addressing whether it's addiction issues, poverty. Poverty. One of the boys involved in us, like tragedy, trauma, poverty, hugely. And because we know the guy, we know about it. So it's so complex. It's more than just a sentence.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're trying to do at Common Ground, is trying to have a more constructive conversation about kind of what people really want beneath the surface. So it's okay understanding people's opinions on crime and how we should respond to crime when we have that kind of like very shallow level conversation. But once you dig deeper into the stories behind the perpetrators and the victims and start to understand all the facts, people's opinions start to not only become a bit more informed, but a little bit more nuanced and go, oh, well, actually, maybe a really long custodial sentence might not, you know, be as helpful, or keeping a mother with their family would be better, or, you know, whatever the scenario looks like. So I think I'm looking forward to doing more research on this and having more of these kind of conversations, restorative conversations with the public around kind of what do we want? How do we get to that safety in a way that's smart and not just reactionary? Because I feel that sometimes and I don't work for the Sentencing Council or any other government agency down south either, so I can speak freely, but that we've been very reactive, and we you know, in England now we're at a point where we've been so reactive to this trend for tougher sentences that now our prisons are full, and we've had to release everybody early anyway, and you know what I mean, and people are homeless, and it's just like, oh, told you so. Like everybody within the justice reform lobby groups have been saying, you know, this is going to happen, and then it happened. So now we've got the sentencing bill, and we've got the courts bill, Leveson bill, and there are proactive steps being made. But some of these recommendations that are in these bills now are like people who suggested them 20, 30 years ago. So I guess it's about kind of having a better conversation about justice and not just waiting for the consequences of not having the conversations.
Yeah, I think we're slightly different then in Scotland, because the Sentencing Council is more about educating and informing the public, and also about ranges, so that you, not that you can predict, because the sentencer has, you know, the ultimate decision on what, having heard all the evidence, what they deem as appropriate. But again, it seemed to me that when I get involved with this at the beginning, it was like, oh, it depends who the judge is, and it depends on this. And where Sentencing Council is moving to is that there are guidelines that are there that for anyone to look at. So it's not just a case of what way the wind's blowing, what day of the week it is. This is the structure of that. And I think that, again, is right and proper, but it sits here. And I think where we're at, we sit over here, but we're all connected.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also, there's another layer to this in terms of public safety, which is what everybody wants, is what's going to make that victim feel safe when that person's inevitably released. Yeah. You know what I mean? And what are their needs? What's the conversation that the justice system isn't having with those people? Yeah. Because surely that's how we're going to get to feeling safe, is through the justice system and its agencies speaking with victims and communities to understand why they don't feel safe and what can be done to help them feel safer. Especially, you know, if perpetrators are living on the same street, or it's antisocial behaviour, or it's neighbourhood dispute, or it's, you know what I mean, someone that you're not going to be able to avoid. Or Jimmy's getting released next week from prison and he's going to be back in the area. I think sometimes we've been avoiding the conversation around safety, and it's always there. And restorative justice, to me, seems like one way of being able to kind of have those conversations more and make people feel more included in the justice process, and have their voices heard.
Yeah, and there's something about that, isn't there? It's about agency. You know, for me, as someone who's been affected and impacted by serious harm, the court process, we were in court 4 times before they even said Sam's name, because it wasn't about him. It was about the court case versus in the names of the boys. So there's something incredibly brave, I think, about having these conversations, because it's a bit awkward, isn't it? Do you know, I don't really want to talk, but somebody's got to go first. Yeah. And if we don't have the conversations, we are never going to, you know, it might be that we examine it and we look at it and we say, actually, that's not going to work for us for X, Y, Z. But unless we have the conversations, we'll never know. So, brave conversations all the way.
Yeah. I'm here for those.
And just connected to that, when you were contacted and asked to be part of that restorative justice process and thinking about brave conversations, was it an easy decision for you to make, to say yes? Did it feel like, well, of course I'll take part in this, or not?
My instinct was to go no and just run, right, and go, because now I was made aware, and this is another thing I often say, is putting people outside their mind in prison actually is just helping them to avoid the harm they've caused as well. It's easy to not think about your victims and for society to forget about those people and just for an extended period of time, and to not worry about them, and just, even though they're like ticking time bombs, you're just waiting to come back into the community. And it's also easy for the people in prison to go, okay, And with a load of people with the same criminogenic, they hold the same criminogenic views as me, who've had the same trauma as me, who all have the same excuses and justifications for their offending behaviour as me. No one's going to actually helpfully challenge me in here. I'm not going to get like therapy. I'm not going to, you know what I mean? It's just like the perfect environment for people not to be accountable or to actually address the offending behaviour. And I don't think that's what we want. And so for me, actually, even if I said no, that was almost empowering to the victims to have been able to go, actually, we are real people. Because I used to think that they were fictional characters. I didn't even believe what I did, because I just dissociated from it. And to actually even just have the practitioners come to me and go, yeah, not your victims are real, and they do, want to hold you accountable. Not in that way, because I would have definitely said no. But, just to be able to, that in itself is a bit of shift of the dynamics. But I said, but they framed it as, it's a voluntary process, and this could be beneficial for you as well. And this would be really helpful for them to answer their questions. And I was like, you know what, I don't want to hold this power over them and this information. It's not going to take much time for me to answer a few questions and agree to take part of it. But I think there's one question that you can ask people if you're struggling with what to ask them is if they say, oh, well, I don't see any benefit in this, you say, well, it might make you feel better about yourself. And that for me was like, oh, and I think a lot of people in prison do want to feel better about themselves. They do want to, if you give them the opportunity to do something good or to contribute, or you give them more responsibility, they usually rise to it. But that's another problem with prison design, is that it strips people of responsibility, and it strips people of choice, and it strips people of agency as well, and it just compounds that kind of problem that we have. Having more brave conversations and asking those questions and having those difficult, even just trying to have those conversations can be a positive.
When I sort of think about restorative justice, it feels like a very personal, intimate thing. You imagine, the person who's caused the harm and those who've been harmed, and it being that small, group of people. But is there a place in that whole restorative process for the wider community, schools or neighbourhoods? I know I don't expect you to have the answers to the justice system, but do you think there's a way or there's a benefit to there being a wider involvement in that process?
Yeah, 100%. The more people you can get talking, it's usually if you know how to do the talking, that's the crucial part. Because if all you've learned is how to blame, is your initial response to anything going wrong is to go, then it's instant kind of going to fall apart, because as soon as you play the blame game, the conversation just falls apart. But if you've got the framework and you know how to have healthy conversations, then you should be having those circles, bringing those people together, and doing it as much as possible, because we need to model as adults how to resolve conflict, how to have difficult conversations. And if we just teach them to storm out the room and to point fingers and to shout louder to win the argument, then, which is probably, it's definitely Westminster, but I don't know what Hollywood is like, but you know what I mean? It's like, how are we modelling this kind of stuff? So that's where I'd see it in the wider landscape, is how do we model having these, whether it's in the schoolroom, whether it's between teachers and parents, whether it's between the Bobby on the street and the kids, up to no good, whatever it is, like wherever there's conflict, our initial response should be, okay, can we do this restoratively? Even though I think there's a problem with branding. I'm trying to think of a better word than restorative, but if we can make restorative cool, and then that's kind of what that would help sell it a little more.
Yeah, I think for me it's probably pretty personal. That as I say, the young men were known to us now. So there's 3 young men involved. One was found guilty of murder, one guilty of culpable homicide, and one, the charges were dropped because he gave evidence against the other 2. Now, the one the charges were dropped was the oldest of them. He has since died by suicide. Now, I have no idea why he died by suicide. That's you know, people are really good at giving their opinions. Oh, it's because of this, that. We don't know why. What I do know is that he had a little boy the same age as my granddaughter, and at the time he died by suicide, he had an 8-week-old baby. So there's 2 wee buddies grown up without their dad. There's another mum, like me, without her son. My granddaughter now goes to the local secondary school where I volunteer, and the little cousin of one of the other boys goes to the same secondary school. So pause that. But the other thing, and we were having this conversation, that when I talk about the F word, the number of people who say to me, you can't possibly forgive them. You can't, no, that's just, you don't forgive them. Like, well, do not? Oh, right, okay, sorry, I must have missed that one. So people, I think, are very eager they have an opinion and they're really eager to share it with you. And this then loops right back into the brave conversations. You need to stand in it and just say, look, for me, that this is it, you know, and I'm in my shoes. But most importantly, for the next generation, for all of these kids, if we don't model good conflict resolution skills, if we don't model a bit of empathy and compassion, and equally model the fact that they are safe in their community, and not only are you safe, but we'll prove it to you that you're safe. You can walk down to your community centre and you don't need to worry about that. You do not need to carry a knife, and we'll evidence to you why that is. If we don't get a grip of this now, it seems to me we're just going to perpetuate it. So it's, to me, it's almost as if it's like, this is the line in the sand time. Yeah. This is our chance to do this. And it's all about the brave conversations, and they just stop. Right, see that? With one thing we're all agreed on is that the system we've been using isn't working particularly well at the moment. So the only question is, what now?
And your experience of being somebody who was a victim or a survivor, whatever the term is that you feel fits best for you, did your absence and sort of Sam's absence within that process, was that something that you kind of felt as soon as it all started?
And there are so many ways, and I'll say that to people, like, you know, I think we've kind of been caught up in this is the justice process and this is what we do, and we do a lot of it really well. But there are other things we could do a wee bit better. I understand the process is the Crown or Her Majesty's Advocate versus the named individuals, but, you know, can we say in relation to the death of, you know, because I'm there 4 times and I'm thinking, you know, the first time I went into court, a police officer said to me, what case are you here for? And I said, oh, Sam Johnston. And he said, it's not on my list. And I said, oh, Samuel Hugh Johnston, he's my son. He was my, and they get, no, that's not the case. The case is and named the boys. And I remember thinking, well, kind of is the case. Kind of is my Wayne. And it kind of is dead. So I think that there are things that we can do that don't cost any money, that just cost a wee bit of thought and a wee bit of, you know, how can we do this better? And I go back to there's only us. You know, when you look at the trauma that's been perpetrated on a lot of our population, I can't get that wee boy out of my head. You know, like my friend who was a Sunday school teacher said to me when Sam died, well, Lynn, we can't believe one of our boys has done that to one of our boys. And then she said, oh, I shouldn't be saying that to you. And I said, why not? Because that's the truth. This should have been entirely preventable. You know, there are other kind, like for us, it would be classed as an ordinary murder in someone's house, known to the perpetrator, males involved, and a bladed implement. Standard stuff in those days, hopefully changing now. But we need to be asking better questions.
And if you don't mind me asking you, Jacob, did it feel like that when you were going through the process, that it was you were being prosecuted, you've been held, but the victim was sort of absent?
My victims had written a victim impact statement, but the judge didn't read it out. And I only had 2 hearings. I had a pre-sentence and then a sentencing. And yeah, I guess it was all about me. And the press were there to try and say Jacob was, you know, not looking remorseful in the dock, and But I do think that it should be weighted the other way, and it should be about, you know, at least listening to the family and victims' needs, needs, and what they want, and whether or not that can just be shifted in a small way to make sure that their views are represented, if that's possible, within the process. But yeah, I remember I knew the victims were there. I was petrified. I was like, oh my gosh, they're actually here. And I was like, you joking? I was like to my barrister, I was like, are you actually joking? They're here in the court room. I was like, because where I'm from, it's all about retaliation. The same way our process can be argued to be, it's quite retaliatory. So I was thinking, I'm going to get killed. I was like, because if it was me, if that was my brother or whatever, then I'm just thinking someone's in this courtroom about to pull a gun out or something and just going to kill me. So I was like on edge, thinking, oh my God, like this is their opportunity to get me. And then, but when I got in the dock for sentencing, I knew they were in the room, but there's all these people around, and everyone was going, oh, he's looking at the floor, he wasn't showing any remorse. I was like, but I didn't know who anybody was. I didn't want to catch the eye of anybody, because I didn't know if it was a journalist, some nosy neighbour, some, an actual victim. So I was just like in the dock looking down, and then I didn't even hear how long I got. The judge was like, I remember going down to the cell and being like, how long did I get? What even happened in there? But I guess to everybody else, everybody has an opinion, don't they? And it's, Jacob didn't care, he had no remorse, wasn't being accountable, couldn't even look anybody in the eye. But I guess it was, that's just from my perspective.
So you've had the experience of being part of that process, and you weren't given that opportunity. But from both of your perspectives, what do you think are the non-negotiable types of support that from each side of the spectrum that has to be there to help people take their place in that process if they want to? What do you think are the most important supports that could be there to have those brave conversations?
Again, I think timing. I think there needs to be consistency in terms of offers of restorative justice, because straight after sentencing, first day in prison, trying to become accustomed to this new life in prison might not be the best time to pitch it, but I think it should be offered at numerous stages of the process. I think is that consistent offer throughout the process. I think for both sides, but speaking from the person who's caused harm, I think it should be offered at various stages. There is a debate to be had as to whether it should be victim-led or whether a request from someone who's caused harm should be able to say, I want to make amends, I want to, after a custodial sentence, so that there's not that worry in the public, rightly so, as to whether they're doing it to try and get a reduced sentence or for alternative reasons. But I think there's, I don't know how much harm there is in allowing perpetrators or people who've caused harm to request it, and then to let the person who's been harmed know that they're requesting restorative justice. That's a different conversation to be had. But I think, consistently reminding people, because otherwise there's no point in letting people know in prison or that have caused harm that restorative justice is an option for them if they can't request it. So I think that's a conversation we need to have, is whether we want restorative justice to be victim-led or whether referrals can come from either side. But what I would say is that in order, if it is victim-led, in order to increase the chances of someone who's caused harm saying yes and agreeing to voluntarily enter that process, we need to adopt like trauma-informed approaches, and because it's very triggering and shameful bringing up a victim, and especially if you want to. Because I'll give you an example very quickly. When I went into prison, my personal officer in prison, he tried to do a victim awareness session with me, and his approach to doing the victim awareness session was print out all the front pages of the newspapers, all the Daily Mail comments, and go, look at this, Jacob. This is what the public think of you. This is what society thinks of you. That's literally his approach to doing a victim awareness session with me. And it's fair to say that I didn't react very well, because, as we all know, when you're shamed, you either run away or you fight, or you avoid. So it's either you're picking up needles, you're smoking, you're lashing out, or you're withdrawing or isolating. That's literally, you can just see it through everyone's behaviours. It's shame playing out in all those behaviour traits. So you need to do it in a way that is trauma-informed, shame-informed, I'd say, and to increase the likelihood of someone engaging and seeing it as a worthwhile exercise that could help them and help victims.
And I know we're talking about a hypothetical, but what do you think would have helped you take up that offer if the offer had been made, and when, you know?
And I guess, I suppose, still could.
Yes, yeah.
But, and that's what I'm wondering. I think we just need to park the shame, like in the whole process. Like, we just need to, because it's not helpful. But I feel shame that I couldn't protect Sam, so we're all carrying something. I wonder if for us so one of the young men's out, lives in the town, see them regularly. It's a bit awkward. The other young man's due for parole in 2028, and I wonder that I have thought about it, and if I can be completely candid, I've thought, what if I request it and he says no, and then I'm going to feel like an idiot. Truthfully, I did. I thought that I went there. I think it needs to be victim focused, but not necessarily victim led. But I also think in our own case, if there's something beneficial and useful, because this young man's going to have to come back into our community, and we know that the chances of him being rehabilitated and not offending again are good family support. He lives 500 metres from my house as the crow flies, so could be a bit awkward, but as much as it pains me to say so, it's probably better that he comes home. And I wonder if some process like that would almost ease the way, like break that cycle of you're bad, and you're in the jail. And it's kind of worse than that, because the community, like living in a small town, like when something happens, like, oh my goodness, the community just descended on us and took care of us and all the rest of it. But there was also a bit of kickback, and it's really, really, I need to be taking them with me, because anybody, like the other young man, the windows get put in, and none of that is useful, and none of that's going to help Sam, and none of that is in my name. So I wonder if there is something, and it's maybe a wee bit off the topic, but I just want, there seems to be something a bit healing and a bit useful in getting it out, having the brave conversation. Maybe don't agree with you, and if you see me down the street, son, just don't say hello to me. I'm not going to hate on you, but just you do your thing and I'll do my thing. But I wonder if there's something very useful in that for both, because it means that when I see him, like, because when I see the other one, my heart goes, and so it would mean that you've kind of broken the ice.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, it absolutely does. And just before we go over to questions from you, could we just say thank you to Lynn and Jacob for sharing? Richard, on you go.
What safeguards matter most to ensure that power imbalances don't create further harm?
Yeah, we do have Gail Cochrane, who's a practitioner and trains in restorative justice processes. So is that maybe something that you could pick up? Is there a mic there that you could?
I suppose the primary thing is being trauma informed and starting with where the people are. So yeah, you do risk assessments, but you do risk assessments as you go. So we have formal ones where we're looking at things that might impact on people's ability to participate. If we are starting with the person harmed, what is it that they're looking for? What are their needs? And if there is something that's going to prevent them from participating, what can we do to minimise that? It might be that they don't want to meet face to face. So safeguards might be about the place that you meet. It might even be about where you're doing your preparation as well. Some of the cases I've worked on, the harm has occurred in the area that the person lives or the place that we're meeting. How can we make that safe for them if they're going to be going past the place where the incident happened, where the harm occurred? So it's really about ensuring the safety first and foremost, building rapport with the person so they trust you. And it works with the person responsible as well. So there has to be trust there. They have to, if you're having these conversations with people, they have to be sure that that you're a safe person to have that conversation with. That you're going to be transparent and honest. I think they're absolutely key. You're not going to fix everything. I think you said that, Lynn. It's not a panacea. So there's lots of safeguards that happen all the way through it, and it's about being aware of that all the time from the very beginning. It can't just be, oh, let's do a risk assessment, it's fine. There are risk assessments that happen all the way through, and you're managing that as you go. It's a dynamic thing. I don't know if that answered that or not.
Yeah, definitely. I remember, like, they were preparing me for the questions of, like, you know, and I guess, like, you know, how will you feel if you're not forgiven, and how will you feel if, you know, they don't want to continue speaking to you, and how will you feel if, you know, when they tell you the harm, you know, how, you know, preparing me to hear about the impact on the family and the fact that, you know, who he was and who James was, and, you know, all the kind of, like, difficult stuff that I was going to hear, like, preparing me for that. So in terms of safeguarding from that side, and then I guess they were doing exactly the same thing for David and Joan, and going, well, you know, how are you going to feel if he says he doesn't know why he punched your son, and how are you going to feel if he says, so that everybody's kind of, like, prepared for, like, all, because, like, it's one thing understanding people's needs and the questions that they want, but then it's like, are they prepared for the answers? And then you wouldn't bring people together until you've done that kind of assessment and prepared people to have those difficult conversations. And then, as you said, as the process goes on, the needs might change, and you're continuing to do those assessments and keeping that safeguarding in mind.
My question is around the use of restorative justice pre-sentence, whether that's with young people at a diversion stage, or whether part of the process of a pre-sentence report, and what your views on the value or challenges with that might be. Thank you.
I think the challenges are that it can be seen as people doing not intentionally aren't doing it for the right reasons, and that it's going to have some sort of outcome on the sentence, or, you know, someone's going to use it to persuade the judge that, you know, they deserve a more lenient sentence. I think it's just about, from a restorative justice practitioner's point of view, I think it's about just being objective and going, is there something, like, where, you know, I can't think of a scenario in my head right now, but I know there will be one where getting the answers might be time sensitive. So for the victims, like, you imagine a victim who's terminally ill and can't wait to get the answers. Do you know what I mean? So there will be exceptional circumstances where, like, it's important to have those brave, difficult conversations at that time. I can't think of any other scenarios right now at the top of my head, but there will be exceptional circumstances where it's right and necessary to have those conversations pre-sentencing. But my view is it's probably better to save it till after, just because it avoids the argument publicly that people are doing it for the wrong reasons, and it just avoids that whole, you know, problem.
I have a very strong interest in restorative justice. I am a retired sheriff. I've been a sentencing judge, and I guess I've been operating as a sheriff at the level at which the sentencing judge is most often presented with the choice between a custodial sentence and a community-based sentence, with the sort of offending that you've both experienced, which is much more serious. That's really the choice, and the the sentence will almost always be a serious custodial sentence, and the restorative justice aspect will fit into that scenario. I must say I am interested in the notion of a restorative justice process being available. I was very interested, to hear you say that it should be offered at every stage, and that's very much the view I take, that it has a role to play at almost every stage of the criminal justice system, and we've seen that operating in other jurisdictions. And in New Zealand, it's central to their youth justice system. And that includes the post-conviction, pre-sentence aspect. And there are, excuse me, and there are other jurisdictions where it is applied at that level. And I think I agree that it must always be a risk that the person who has caused the harm will participate, because this is perceived as a route to something less serious, some less serious outcome, and it's not difficult to see a cynicism being brought into engaging in a process. But having said that, in Scotland, our sentencing regime already has a very high element of restorative components in it. So much of the language around community-based disposals, the policy that underlies it has restorative elements in the language and the concepts. The concept of payback, the concept of accountability. It's not just all about the offender. So I don't have a strong view or the answer, and I'm really interested to hear you both sharing the view that the restorative justice aspect should probably be kept separate from the sentencing, and that's an interesting viewpoint. When in some jurisdictions the restorative process, if it's allowed to take place before sentence, might inform the sentence. The sentencer would not be bound by anything that happens in the restorative process, but it might inform the final outcome. So how the balance is struck to ensure that it's an independent, compassionate process is the challenge. But you shouldn't have given me the microphone, because at the heart of this, I've heard it said by an eminent professor, Mazzucato in Milan, who is a world expert on restorative justice, and we've both met her. And she said the worst thing you can do about restorative justice is to over-intellectualize it, because at the heart of it, we're dealing with a very basic human interaction of conversation. And so I always come back to that even in that post-conviction, pre-sentence space, I think that there are ways of introducing safeguards to ensure that a cynical approach isn't controlling the outcome, and that in fact a truly restorative process takes place, that the person who's been harmed can feel part of, and that they've had a role in the process that has led to the outcome that is going to affect the person that harmed them. And striking the balance that achieves that desirable outcome against any cynical role being played by the person who's caused the harm is the challenge.
I wanted to, again, thinking about children and young people and their parents, you talked about the role of shame as a barrier to engagement with RJ, and the importance of almost like rebranding or repackaging to make restorative justice cool. And I suppose I wondered, you also talked about the importance of who makes the offer and how it's presented and the timing of that. I just wondered if you had any particular advice for us who are trying to kind of make the offer at the right time and think about that for Scotland. If you've got any advice about how we maximise that opportunity and about the branding or the approach based on each of your unique perspectives as a parent and as a person who'd caused the harm.
fess up here. When Sam was younger, I love that boy, but he was a wee roaster. And I took him to school one day, and about an hour and a half later I got a phone call, and it was Sergeant such and such from Saltcoats Police Office. We've got Sam here, he's just been arrested in Largs with a pickaxe and an axe, and he's knocked a woman's wall down and chopped her tree down. And I've said, no, I haven't, sorry, Sergeant, I've just dropped him at school. Anyway, that was Sam. That was my Sam. He had left school, had gotten the train to Largs and had done that. I'd forgotten about this, and it was only after I spoke to Karen. I have had experience of restorative justice. As a mummy, I'm trying to protect my child, but truthfully, the social worker came to the house, and I was absolutely sick with worry. Sam had to write a letter of apology, which he did, and I helped him with it, but he wrote it. Like, he structured it, I helped him with his words and things like that. He sent it away. 2 weeks later, the social worker came back. So this didn't get referred to the reporter or anything like that. But so social worker came back and she said, the woman wrote back. And I said, well, that was very nice of her. And she went, no, you don't understand. This doesn't happen. The woman wrote back. And this kind, amazing, graceful woman who had her tree chopped down and her wall knocked down had said to him, look, I know my garden was a bit of a mess, son, but it was my garden. And I'm glad that you've written this letter to me. I appreciate it, and going to do me a favour. Don't do that again, and use this experience to go on and do something else. And he kind of did. So I'm not answering your question in terms of when it should be offered, but for me, even looking back now, as much as I want to protect my child, I feel as if it's a relevant, it's a valid story that he did this. That it caused harm. You want to see the blooming pickaxe, and that's another story. But but he got the ownership. He got to the amazing social worker coming back to give him the feedback that the lady wrote back, and he still had his wee ducks and dives and things like that. We never did anything like that again. And to me, that was a better than, to go to the reporter and all the rest of it. It was like, you did this, you apologise to that woman, and you do it properly, and you do it with a heartfelt apology, and incidentally don't do it again. So I would say that it depends on the extent of the harm that's been caused. It really does. And I think for that particular instance, when it happened and how it happened was perfect.
Yeah. And can you remember how that came about as an option to write a letter?
It was the social worker. I mean, it was like, it was scary with the police, and then and came to the house, and you had to be there, and she just said, like, this is what we're going to do, so we did it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Sometimes the best way of, because in the UK we have a distinction between complex and sensitive cases and normal cases. And complex and sensitive cases require a higher level of training to facilitate those types of cases. And I think the best way they try to explain the difference, well, me and some of my colleagues explain how to distinguish between a complex and sensitive case and a normal case is, would you go in there and just ask the victim what happened? Like, in terms of, if it was a great deal of harm, you wouldn't just go in there and go, please tell me what happened to you. You know what I mean? And like, if you suspect that it's going to cause a lot of trauma, just reliving or talking about what happened, then that probably is a complex and sensitive case. But so I guess it's different in terms of the approach. It's different in terms of the approach you might take in terms of being more shame informed, which is what we were talking about earlier. For those higher levels of harm. I think it's going in and just taking a view of, we just want to tell you more information. We just want to reassure you about what the process is. It's not here to shame you. It's not here to tell you what to do. It's about getting everybody an opportunity to be heard and to be able to move forward, and how that might benefit you to not feel so bad about yourself. Or, it's about moving forward. It's not a retributive judgment process. Yes, there'll be things, people will want to talk about things that are difficult, but it's not centred on making you feel worse. Otherwise, we wouldn't be bringing you together if that was the case. And framing it in all that kind of language. Like, it's a voluntary process, you can pull out anytime you want. It's not to make you feel worse, it's about everybody moving forward. And then I think it's maybe ideally you'd have someone you'd have that youth worker that they've been working with, or you'd have that person that they get on really well with to pitch it. But the problem is that currently, in the UK, we've got it funded. Every police and crime commissioner area funds it. The problem we have is that it's the victim liaison officers or the youth justice managers, and actually the people that are working with the victims and the perpetrators that haven't got enough information and are gatekeeping. And even though they've got the trust in the bank with the young people and with the victims or people who've been harmed, to have that conversation with them, because they don't have the knowledge as to what restorative justice is, and they take the approach of, this is my victim and this is my young person, that they actually are unhelpful and are gatekeeping often. So that's why in the UK, in England, we don't have as many referrals as we'd like. And the biggest barrier to referrals coming in is gatekeeping of people who've caused harm and people who have been harmed with their professionals around them. So I guess it's educating those people to kind of not be barriers and actually work with the people they're supporting to make their own choices and have their own agency.
I think shame's inevitable sometimes, and you just have to be honest. And when you're working with people responsible for harm, say, this is why we use the language about putting the harm at the centre. So it's not on that individual. It's very much about talking about the harm. And, that the language we use in restorative justice helps people to deal with the shame. And, you have to talk to people about, this is going to be difficult, this is going to be hard. Being accountable for harm is difficult. And you have to be honest with people and, not go right in with it. But I think certainly you have to acknowledge that sometimes shame can be useful. The people are going to feel shame, whether you like it or not. They're human beings, and sometimes they are going to feel shame. It's about using that to move forward. It can be, there are some moments in restorative processes where that shame can move people into a different place, and it can move them on, and they no longer feel shame for what they've done. So I think we have to acknowledge it is going to happen and be honest with people, and utilise it rather than pretending it's not going to happen. But, put the harm at the centre. The harm's happened, but the individual, their circumstances allowed that to happen, but it's not all they're about.
Yeah, you can't shy away from the harm that's been caused, but you want to get people having the conversation and get them in. And what I would say, the way I've learned since of looking at the harm is, people made bad choices, but they're not necessarily bad people. And that's the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is, I did a bad thing, and I feel guilty about that. And shame is, I am a bad person, and I am a bad person. And making that distinction, I think that's the distinction between a restorative approach and a punitive approach. Is, you are a bad person, you got the mugshot, you failed in school, you're a naughty kid, you've been excluded, you've been isolated, you're not worthy of love and compassion. And the restorative approach is, yes, it's not the soft approach, so that we are holding you accountable. We're not going to shy away from the harm you've caused, but we don't want this to continue, and we want to give everyone a voice and express that. But we don't just want to live in that blame. We want to find a way forward, which is the last restorative question, which is, what do we all need to move forward? I think sometimes we get stuck on the what happened and what is the harm that's caused, and we forget to go to the what do we all need to move forward.
Hi, thanks. I'm David Orr. I'm a social work team leader in youth justice in Edinburgh, and 10 plus years ago I was seconded to what was then the Centre for Youth and Criminal Justice, but is now Children and Young People's Centre for Justice. I raised that because I remember organising a restorative justice in the aftermath of a serious crime conference 10 plus years ago. And I kind of reflect on what's changed since that time up until this time. And I take the point that David Mackey meant about over-intellectualisation as well. I think we've become fantastic commentators on restorative justice. I think we have had hugely powerful events similar to this one. And there isn't a case against it or a strong case against it. It should just be happening, and it should be happening in much greater volume than it is. And we have a Scottish Government position as commitment to restorative justice to everyone that wants it across the country. And we're not delivering, and we're just not. I've done one restorative justice conference in the last 17 years. Probably the most powerful bit of work that I feel I ever did. Couldn't repeat it because the dynamics were wrong. Victim, person harmed was interested, person responsible wasn't, or vice versa. And having thought about it a lot, for me, the biggest issue remains the pickup point at the start. How do we connect persons harmed with persons responsible in a safe way? And the only way that you can do that, from what I can see, is that somebody's got to be responsible for getting that information, asking for it at the right time. Maybe not once, maybe 3 times, maybe at different times. But like, we need to step up, because the talking gets frustrating whenever the action doesn't follow.
Yeah.
So the question I think there is about pickup. Where do we connect the persons harmed and persons responsible, and how more effectively?
And can I ask you what you think from your experience of working in the sector?
I think people have anxieties about databases, being on a victim's database, being on a person's responsible database. You've got concerns from different sectors about violence against women, domestic abuse. You've got concerns about victims of sexual harm. But equally, people will have seen Neil V. Griffiths, who did the film The Meeting, about being a victim of sexual harm, engaging in a restorative justice process, and it making her feel better. Is it the police? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But we're not connecting the different parts of that conflict reliably. And things matter. Like your example of, why can't we have Her Majesty's Advocate acting on behalf of Sam Johnson versus the people? Just do it. Like, let's do the small things that will make a difference.
Yeah, and I think you're speaking into it's not catch-22, but it's the kind of dilemma of, do we wait for the local authority to go, here's the green light, or do we wait for primary legislation to give us permission to make sure everybody gets asked, or gets told about restorative justice at all access, at all parts of the process? Do we make sure that the resources and the funding are there to make sure we can bring victims and perpetrators together if we do start getting referrals? Do you know what I mean? Or do we just individually do it? Do you know what I mean? And that is that should be a kind of workshop, to be honest. I can see that as a day's kind of okay, let's bring partners in together, instead of not just doing the talking, but going, okay, what are the barriers in the local youth justice team to just doing restorative justice? What are the barriers within prison that are preventing from people just doing restorative justice? And take those places and just go, okay, what is it that's actually preventing us all from doing it? And where are we pointing the fingers in terms of what are the excuses as to why we can't do it? And then let's try and remove those barriers and just crack on. But I get your frustration, because there's the will there, and then it just seems like we all as individuals kind of feel powerless to actually just do it. And it's how can we empower ourselves to empower others to have a voice in the justice process? And that's, I guess, the big question of today, for me anyway.
I think we've got time for just one last question from you. Yeah.
I was particularly interested in what you said about forgiveness, and it strikes me that of those people who are currently in custody, their first knowledge of the restorative justice process probably comes through something offered by the chaplaincy in prison, and therefore it is intrinsically tied to a faith-based way of looking at things. And I was wondering what your view on that was, whether that has positives or negatives, and in such a way that it may inspire people when they leave prison to take up any offer of restorative justice that might be made to them, or conversely, might it put some people off?
What's true is that some people might come across restorative themed courses or victim related courses through faith-based organisations in prison, I don't know if Sycamore Tree existed I never went on the Sycamore Tree, and I've never witnessed it either, but I've heard good things about it, and it's a more trauma-informed way of discussing harm. which I think is always a good thing. But in terms of the actual referrals and those people who would be conducting the process, I don't think that they would be faith-based organisations. I'm not sure how accurate that is in Scotland, but in the UK, you may have faith-based organisations doing the work, lots of different religions doing different types of work, but the actual agencies and people conducting the restorative justice process and doing the needs assessments, they wouldn't be faith-based. And a lot of people ask me whether I'm religious, and a lot of people ask David and Joan, my victims, whether they're religious, and they're not. And sometimes that frustrates people, I feel, because I think people feel like, damn it, there's not a simple reason as to why they've gone on this journey. That simplifies it for people, because people are always looking for, there must be an explanation, there must be a reason why someone's been able to do this. And they're looking to go, it's just because they're religious, isn't it? It's just because they're, that's why they did it. But then they're like, so they have to start digging a little deeper in the search for how could they do this and why did they do it? And I would say I'm a man of faith, but I'm not necessarily practicing any particular faith. And I'm all for being more forgiving. I think it's a good value that we should kind of have. But to answer your question, I'm not sure the answer to that really. I don't think that if you guys take it off in Scotland, it won't be faith-based organisations. I don't suspect. It depends who gets the contract and what that looks like in the future. If who's going to be delivering those contracts or who's going to be doing the doing. But if they're best placed to do the doing, the problem is in England there was a lot of people just doing the doing, and people caught wind of it, and then started trying to regulate the whole sector more. So it's just, but then at the same time you want to prioritise safeguarding, and you want to prioritise, good frameworks that keep everyone safe. So you start running into this, you had trailblazers running ahead and just doing conferences and doing the doing, who had the training. We're just like, I'm just going to bring two people together. All right. And they were following the process and safeguarding, but they were operating outside. So then we had the Restorative Justice Council, who started to regulate the process. And then the big problem, if you're talking about prison-related restorative justice, HMPPS in England started managing risk, which is what they do best, and then started redefining what complex and sensitive cases were, and then started centralising a referral mechanism for all referrals. So now there's a team of 4 or 5 people in the MOJ that are making the decisions on all cases with somebody in prison. And now the waiting time is 18 months for victims before an outcome is even made as to whether or not the victim can meet the perpetrator and the conversation can even go ahead. So it's looking out for those kind of bureaucratic processes, trying to find the right process between keeping the process safe but not getting in the way of actually people being able to doing. So they're just a few things to look out for as RJ expands in Scotland, to kind of keep an eye on, trying to take care of the safeguarding and managing risk, but also just trusting trained practitioners to do what they do and what they've been trained to do, and letting them do it.
I know it's really difficult, and I know it's frustrating. There's loads of people, me included, because we did restorative justice work when I was in the violence reduction unit. I've always liked it. I don't think anybody should be able to tell anybody who's experienced harm how they should experience justice. I just think that that's the wrong thing. If I was somebody who'd experienced harm, I think it should be up to me about how I want to experience it. And there's some, the restorative justice team are in the room, Hannah, Chloe, some of the people from CYCJ, the government colleagues they're publishing tomorrow their practice framework, and some of the outcome from some of the test cases in restorative justice. I keep saying to people, this is not a low-cost, no-cost option. The very things that Jacob was just saying, people having waiting lists, that's not right. See if somebody decides this is what I want to do. You want to make it happen at the pace that they want to go to, and not say you're just going to have to wait a year. That's not the right thing. Also, the people who I've worked with who've experienced, and it often has been, it's been murders, they've lived in poverty. They need to be able to travel to often places, even to prisons, where the person who's harmed them is being held. We need to be able to cover that cost. So there's a cost involved as well. I do also agree that things never happen too fast, they happen too slow. And 18 years feels a little bit of a long time for this to be rolled out. It cannot be beyond the wit of us to get this rolled out quickly. I hope whatever happens after the election, I hope the governments that come in, I've spoken to all the political parties, that's a whole other conversation, but almost every single one, in fact every single party, said that they really liked this. Now, sometimes for the wrong reasons. I think sometimes they wanted a finger pointing, and guess what you did? But actually they agreed. So I think that whatever happens post-election, we should at least have a platform for things to go forward. But listen, thanks very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I do actually want to make it a day, and I hope you do too. So letters coming to, letters to be written by you in the future. But thanks very much.